Dr. Fuller, I don't know how you do life without coffee.
I'm just naturally high on life, my friend.
That's just it. I was thinking of you this morning like that. That just blows my mind, man.
Yeah, even my wife gives me a hard time about it. She's like, how did you survive the Army, infantry, explosive ordnance, and 20 years in the Bureau without drinking or drinking coffee? I'm like, oh, my hair turned white. What do you want me to say? You know?
I could do life without booze. I mean, I do enjoy bourbon. Obviously, everybody knows that, but I could do life without booze. But coffee, man, gosh, I just don't know.
Well, you'd have to rename your show at the very least, right?
But
and it's not as catchy, you know. Ice cold water with Rich, you know. It doesn't hook the viewer.
No, you do tea with Rich.
You could do that, but you know, you'd probably sacrifice a sizable portion of your American audience. Might pick up a lot of Brits though.
That's true. We've got one or two already. So thank you for those Brits out there. Speaking of which, I released the video I made in Scotland. I don't know if you had an opportunity to see it yet.
I've seen parts of it. I every time I sit down to watch it, you know, some little person comes in with a dire emergency. So,
yeah, but how the Scots became disarmed, and one of the comments was, "We're not Americans. We don't want or need to be armed." I'm like, hope that works out for you. Good luck with that.
So, are you an independent nation? No. Oh, all right, just checking. Well, I remember when they lost their weapons, right? The shooting that they had at the school.
Yeah, the Dunab in 1996, Scotland, wherever.
Yeah, it was a horrible thing. I mean, they had something right around the same time in California, in Stockton.
Yeah, Stockton. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and you know, the news picked it up, and I'll tell you what, that changed in Scotland almost overnight. I mean, they lost their guns like right now.
Yeah, it was a horrific shooting, man. By all accounts, I believe the guy was like a pedo. I don't know if you know much about that case.
No, I do not.
Yeah, he was like a scout leader and helped with boys gymnastics. And I think they were, and I may be misremembering this, but I think they were kind of tightening the noose around this guy. And they just went into a school with some handguns and started killing everybody. I mean, what a piece of shit.
Was he after witnesses, you know, previous victims, or just?
No, just one of those things, you know.
Yes, ultimately it doesn't matter.
Yeah, there's Craig Holland over there in the UK. We were talking about how you guys got disarmed. And, you know, I think with that, the UK had been sliding, but the massacre in Dunab, and I'm sure I'm mispronouncing that school up in Scotland, a massacre in 1996, was just the final nail in the coffin to get rid of anything and everything. Which, you know, it's interesting because, you know, Israel, they had that school massacre that went on for like 2 or 3 days. 26 kids got killed, you know, and they kind of swung the other way. Oh, okay, we're going to arm teachers, so when they have people come in, they can put them in the ground.
Yeah, and guess what stopped happening?
Yeah.
And they had, you know, people forget that the Palestinians. It wasn't the Russians. It wasn't the Germans. It was the Palestinians that were doing it. Yeah, and here we are, what, 50 years later, 40 years later, and they're still fighting the Palestinians.
Yeah. But Jeff Brown says, Mountain Dew with Rich, he'll tickle your innards. That was actually one of their slogans back in the day, believe it or not.
Right, and well, it should be.
Yeah. Johnny King is on. Says, good morning, gentlemen. That's what you already said. Craig is on. Eric is on. Says, good morning, folks. Will Rhodes is on. Good morning, Rich and Dr. Fuller. Coin number 2269. Don Bothwell is on 2270. Wow, look at that. Right back to back. Serialized inventory here. Good morning from Northwest Montana, gents. No coffee? That ain't happening for me. Me either, sir. And I don't usually do this, but I thought I would since it's a Monday morning and all the shipping is going out. Give the gift of American Warrior Society. So these are the coins that'll be shipping out today for 11 new members over the weekend. And if you want to find out becoming one of those members is the right decision for you and your family, or if you want to give the gift of American Warrior Society to someone, please check out the links in today's show notes. If you want to pick up some swag, I got some shirts and hoodies that are also shipping out today. And I believe one of them is yours, Mr. Will Rhodes. So congrats on that. But yeah, if you want to get some of that, we got it all for you. Just click the links in today's show notes. Craig says, what does Craig say there, Dr. Fuller? Can you read that?
I have shotguns, but we are not allowed to use them for self-defense. Yeah, that's an amazing thing about England. I was, like you, I was over there this year, and I spent some time with a friend of mine who's a police superintendent, which I'm not exactly sure where that ranks, but it sounds important, and I know he's been doing the job for 20, 30 years. And we were talking about this, and it's amazing to me that you can have the gun in the house, and someone can violently break into your home, armed, make statements about how they're going to, kill you and your family and everything else. And the second you pick up that shotgun and use it to defend yourself, you're the bad guy. And
that is absolutely insane, is it not?
Yeah. But it does speak back to a point that our mutual friend Andrew Branca makes all the time. He's like, look, I look at my sidearm and my self-defense weapon and say, if I'm going to use this on another person, I'm fully prepared to go to prison for it. Mm-hmm. So any decision I make to use that gun is through that filter. I view it through that filter. Is this offense that I'm facing, that I'm going to stop with this firearm, sufficiently dire that I will be okay with spending the rest of my life in a box?
Yeah, I mean, it would be nice to sit back in stoic reflection and think of the legal ramifications, but you can't. You just have to pre-plan that, like right. You are talking about. Like, I know this, and for me, it's like, whose life am I saving when I pull that gun out? And it should be your own, but sometimes it might be third-party defense. And if you do that, as Daniel Penny can attest, and many, many others, the legal ramifications of that, a lot of times depends on the jurisdiction that you're standing in. Here in Crossville, the mayor would probably give you the keys to the city if you had saved commuters not that there are subways in Crossville, Tennessee, of course, but you know what I mean? I
do. And South Carolina's the same thing. Honestly, that's a big reason I picked where I live. I mean, for some of you know, I'm a California native, but frankly, the contents of this room that I'm sitting in right now, if I were to move it to California, they'd lock me up in Pelican Bay the next day. I mean, I'd be locked up for the rest of my life. And, simple possession would get me put away.
Yeah.
But, and
we're not talking about simple possession of a dime bag, ladies and gentlemen.
We are not, because that's perfectly legal, apparently.
Oh, yeah.
But it does really constrain people like you and I and the viewers here on the American Warrior Show from involving themselves in third-party defense anymore.
Oh, yeah.
People will, and we talked about this last week, was people are much more willing to pull out a phone and video than they are to step up and stop the violence.
Yeah.
And I know in my case, the number of people that I will use force to defend is very, very small.
Amen.
Very small. And I'm much more likely to, if I envision a situation where I would be likely to use violence, it would be to escape a situation. I'm going out that door and you're trying to stop me.
Yeah. And that's an easy one to defend, right?
Yeah.
I'm trying to get out of here and somebody's blocking the exit and okay.
Yeah.
Will Parker says, aside from my very short list, I only plan to intervene on behalf of children. Yeah, and that's another one easily to defend. And, you and I have talked about this multiple times, the whole active shooter phenomenon, whether it's at school or somewhere else. I hate to say, let's call it active murderer. The tool he happens to be using just happens to fire projectiles. Because I have a problem with the words on that stuff. Like what do they call it? Gun violence and stuff like this. And
I do the same thing. I tend to call them spree killers.
Yeah.
But yeah, the idea is the same. I did the same thing when I was working on child pornography cases and preferential sex offenders. Was too often people would use the term kiddie porn, and to me that always seemed to soften the impact of what we're talking about, because what we were talking about was the immortalization of child rape, and throwing a phrase around like kiddie porn, to me it hit the ear differently.
Yeah.
So I was like, no, words matter. And, I wasn't running around going, we must change the way that, I was just, in my case, that was what I would refer to it as.
I have no, I never worked a case like that. I have no backstory on it. We prosecuted a staff sergeant in the Marine Corps who had a bunch of stuff on his laptop. He got 23 years in prison. Never touched a child, as far as we know. But just for possessing that stuff, they shipped his ass out for 23 years and obviously a dishonorable discharge. He's still there, obviously, and will be for another decade. And but there's a movie called, I know we're getting off the show, but sometimes people like when we take detours. I remember when Justin, Carol, and I had the Across the Peak podcast, we'd always apologize for the detours, and we'd get a flood of emails like, no, bro, we love when y'all go off-road, so please take it off-road. There's a movie called The Butterfly Effect with, have you seen it? Ashton Kutcher?
Yep.
There's a scene in there where the mother drops him off, and he's a little boy, and he's going to stay with this little girl that he's very interested in. One of his classmates, and the dad seems like he's a really good guy, but then he takes the kids in the basement. And I mean, I'm getting chills, man. And it's just like he sets up a camera and he's drunk and, he's got the kids in front of it, and then they flash away from it. But I just remember being like, oh my God, it just what goes on in your head, like what happened next. And he's like, what happened? And the little girl looks changed forever. It's like, the people that do that, man, they deserve no quarter.
Yeah, and it does impact it cascades, right? These kids get victimized at such a young age. And I used to lecture on this, but sexual development in the best of circumstances is a difficult time for anybody, especially when it's happening, right? You're young, you don't have any life experience. And for someone to come in at that point and victimize you in the middle of that development, you can't help but have lifelong impact. And those impacts look different, based on circumstances and the victim typology and everything else. But it cascades forever. And so it's just a reprehensible crime. It's an absolutely reprehensible crime.
That's a great way of putting it. I never really, of course, I probably thought about it like that, but to hear it said, it is a generational crime, because it will cascade through eternity and cause people yet unborn to feel the pain and of that. Let's see what we've got. Don Bothwell says the bystander effect has now become easier with the advent of cell phone cameras, but it's not new. Back in the mid-1960s, a young woman named Kitty Genovese was raped and stabbed to death on the sidewalk in front of an apartment building in New York. She was screaming for help the whole time, and no one came to her rescue. That's where the bystander effect was coined from her murder. It's one of those things where, well, I think they're going to call it in. They'll probably call it in. Somebody's calling it in. It's not my responsibility. And, we have to stop that. Make it your responsibility.
And some people did call it in, but the response was underwhelming.
Yeah,
it really was. And some interesting research has been done on that case in the years since. It's pretty impactful stuff. But regardless, the bottom line is all it would have taken was one person leaving their house.
You know about her brother?
I did when I was looking at it, but I haven't looked at that case in a decade. So.
Brother was joined the Marine Corps. He wanted to help people because of that. I mean, because it speaks to it. Your point was these are generational ripples, right? And because at the time, I think the mythos was that nobody had intervened. And in fact, a few people, perhaps it now seems, did take a few actions, not enough, obviously, to save the young woman. But he joined the Marine Corps. His whole life was altered, and he just tried to intervene in every way he could to help others. Very impactful.
Yeah. And like I said, how that impact ripples out is different case to case to case. I mean, I arrested plenty of people that were adults, and during their post-arrest interviews, they tell me that they were victimized as kids, and that they began victimizing others in essence to try to understand and get, what happened to themselves, retrieve some level of power in that dynamic. And then of course they had all kinds of justifications. Well, I'm helping.
There you go.
I'm teaching. That was the one that drove me bananas. Well, I'm teaching them what they need to know. They're 4. They don't need to know that.
God.
That was far and away not the youngest victim I ever had to deal with. Believe me.
I'm teaching them. I never heard that one.
Oh yeah, that was very common.
Jesus Christ.
I had one bragging to me one time, showing me pictures. Oh, she's very precocious. The kid was 3. I'm like, what disconnect happened in your head to get you to that point? I mean, really, where did life just go completely off the rails? But again, like you said, we're getting off the topic of the show.
We are. So let's get back on topic. I got a few things I want to talk to you, and then we're going to dig into something that you and I were texting about yesterday. Drone swarms, man. Drone swarms in New York area, obviously all over New Jersey. We're not talking about the little drones like, the Maverick Mini or whatever the hell it is that I've got or you have. We're talking about SUV-sized drones. These, I would imagine, are nation-state drones. I don't imagine that somebody like me or you has the wherewithal to purchase one that's the size of an SUV. I mean, one that's smaller than a dinner table that can, spray your crops is $20,000 or $30,000. So these are very expensive. They've got long flight time, and we're talking about dozens and dozens of them. What in the hell is going on with this? And I know the FBI is now looking into it, by the way.
Yeah, well, I don't have obviously any inside baseball information on what the FBI is doing with that, but I think the larger point is this is the wave of the future. I mean, this is going to be how combat takes place, and there's all kinds of ethical and philosophical discussions you can have around these things. But to what you just said, yeah, it has to be nation state. I mean, the number of people that can buy 50 drones at $5,000 or $10,000 a piece, arm them, and then the computing power it takes to control them. I mean, yes, it can be done, but not with my laptop, right? I mean, not my phone doesn't have the computing power necessary. And then you also have to have the skill set to operate this stuff. I think that's going to get more and more simple. It's going to be much more plug and play. It's going to be much more easy to control as time goes on. And as much as I joke around with my wife about, hey, they make a drone that's a flamethrower now, why don't we own one? That would be a stretch for me to buy one, let alone 50. But
well, I looked into those yesterday because I'm like, let me see what the commercial drone market looks like, and just looking around. Like I said, one that's smaller than a table for four. It could carry like 10 gallons, and so it could spray the field or be a flamethrower, right? And it was $20,000. So you imagine when the size of an SUV, we're potentially talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars. And then to your point, Dr. Fuller, you have 40, 50 of them, and their flight time is measured in hours, not minutes. And we've always thought, we're surrounded by oceans, so we have this giant standoff. So what nation state actor could have the infrastructure and the logistics to have something like this and not be detected on American soil? That spooks me.
Yeah, and it is the wave of the future, buddy. I mean, it's because as cost prohibitive as it is for the individual citizen, that's a nothing burger for a nation state. Right? I mean, we toss Tomahawk missiles around, cruise missiles around at what, $1 million, $2 million a copy. Mm-hmm. That buys you a lot of suicide drones, and right. You can get the table size ones, but imagine the ones that are flying around that are just the size of a hand grenade, mm-hmm. and you put a few hundred of those in the air. That's tough to stop. And we see from the Ukraine what impact that has on the battlefield. Mm-hmm. Right? I mean, what can you do? I mean, artillery, maybe you can dig a hole and put a roof on, and you might be okay. These things can fly down, come through the door, under the door, around the door, through the firing slit, and then detonate. So I mean, it's great in that you're, steel not flesh, right? You can send a drone instead of my son, and I'm cool with that. The problem is somebody else is going to send their drone after my son, and I'm not cool with that. And it takes away a lot of the risk, right? I mean, you look at World War I, and the war to end all wars. It was just so costly in terms of human capital that everyone swore up and down, we are not going to do this again. Well, if all the casualties are drones, well, maybe it's not as expensive as we thought it would be. Maybe it's a little easier to go to war if we're just going to have drone fighter aircraft duking it out in the skies over Europe. I think it'll lend itself to a more casual approach to the devastation of warfare. I remember as a kid, I used to read these science fiction books about ogres, which were these giant tanks that were AI controlled. And of course, it was the stuff of future, right? These tanks making decisions on what targets to address, and grossly over armored, and the size of a modern 2-story home kind of thing on tracks and just rolling around. And now I'm thinking, geez, by the end of my lifetime, is that going to be on the battlefield? I mean, we've got huge ones in the air. We've got huge ones in the ocean. I mean, where does it stop?
I don't know. And then there's the whole thing of, I don't know. I was going to say that the potentiality for UAP is there, but I want to say people are saying they're hearing the drone motors. If that's the case, and then it certainly is not anything otherworldly. Dr. Gordon Botson is on. He is coin number 1688. Lance Braden says, good morning. I always appreciate your professional insights, as do I. Alan says, commercial and combat ironic uses, get your package delivered or your property destroyed. One of the things people laugh, I went out and bought a bunch of chicken wire and I have rolls and rolls of chicken wire because again, that would at least stop the first hit till it pops a hole in the chicken wire, and then so you're going to have to waste a few drones if I need to set that up. But
yeah, how long until we're all buying EMP weapons to knock these things out of the sky?
Well, that's why I don't understand why they haven't brought one of these things down. I don't understand why we haven't targeted with some sort of EMP weapon or however they use to jam the signal going to the drone. And let's get a look at one of these things because we're going to have to. This is a national security issue. It's flying over Trump's place up there. And I don't know.
Yeah, I may have mentioned it in one show a couple of years ago, but one of the jobs I had as I was finishing up my career here in Charlotte was I worked really large-scale events as a crisis management coordinator for the Charlotte division of the FBI. And one of the large-scale events that we have all the time here is NASCAR.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So we have Charlotte Motor Speedway out there, and you have NASCAR events, and it's crazy the draw. I mean, it's nothing to have 250,000 people out there roaming around. You're from the South. I'm sure you're more familiar with NASCAR than I'll ever be. But we were having a meeting one time right towards the end of my career, and we, I was planning up for a big weekend race that was coming up, and kind of got to the point where somebody said, "All right, any other questions before we wrap this up?" And I stuck my paw in the air. I said, "Hey, what is our plan for drones?" And you'd have thought I'd have just dropped a turd in the punch bowl. I mean, everybody just kind of stopped and went, "Drones?" Because, if you get a fist-sized rock out on the track of a NASCAR event, they stop the show.
Oh, yeah.
Right. If it rains, they have these trucks that have jet engines mounted on the back facing down, and they drive them 5 or 6 abreast around the track at about 4 miles an hour and blow dry the track because they don't want a speck of water out there on that track. And I'm like, okay, you take a 40-pound drone and fly it into one of those cars going 200 plus miles an hour.
Yeah.
The impact is fairly devastating. And they had to come up with an entire, and I'm sure other people higher up the chain of NASCAR were thinking this, but nobody in that meeting had even considered it. And so the immediate response was, well, we'll put a couple of 12 gauges in the center of the track. And I'm like, doesn't really solve your problem. Okay, you shot it down. Now it's lying on the track. So
I was equally the Marine Corps back in the late 90s, maybe early 2000s. We put millions of dollars into a NASCAR. So we had a Marine Corps NASCAR. And I remember talking to the major whose job was it was his baby, right? He went wherever the NASCAR car went and handled the press and all this stuff. And the driver gets in the car and I'm like, "Hey, sir, what's the plan if this guy gets killed on the track? Do you have something already written up or ready to unfurl it and go, it is great.
What's our contingency for this event?"
Yeah. He's like, never thought of it. I'm like, well, I said, number one, you don't want to be caught flat-footed with that. Number two, there's an opportunity. Within every bad thing, there's an opportunity for the Marine Corps to come out, with tears streaming down her face and dress blues and talk about the loss of Ricky Bobby or whoever the hell was driving that thing.
Right. And not have to wait a week to get that out.
Right. Be ready.
Yeah.
Let's talk about one of the things that's been rumored, and that is JSOC potentially going after the cartels in 47's administration. What do you think about that?
Well, I think that Sicario was a fun movie, and Sicario 2 was a fun movie. It's a great soundbite for run up to an election, but it's not as easy as just cutting the boys loose, right? You're talking about violating another sovereign nation's airspace, their ground space. What do they call it when you take armed military personnel and put them into another country? Oh, an invasion. Yes, that's what that is.
Okay, let's set that aside. Let's say there's tacit approval by the host nation, right?
Well, there would have to be more than tacit approval, right? I mean, there would have to be, because, what happens when one of your guys dies? What happens when one of your guys
gets rolled up by Mexican police, right?
Right. Now you've killed a civilian that, non-involved, or you killed a hostage. What happens when your guys kill a cop that may or may not have been on the take? I mean, there's a lot of complicated issues. Just flying a Black Hawk over the border is a violation of sovereign airspace, assuming that we're talking about Mexico.
And we are.
It'll apply to any of the countries down there, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, on the one side, I think an argument can be made that Mexico is teetering on the edge of being a failed narco state.
100%.
On the other side of that coin, they are still a functioning democracy. They are still a functioning nation, albeit rife with problems, but they're out there. So I don't think that we can just willy-nilly invade. That being said, I think, to your point, you can make agreements. You can establish treaties. I mean, we had armed personnel in Colombia during the cocaine wars.
Absolutely.
That were running around.
JSOC was down there. Intelligence support activity had Central Spike going on with these Cessnas flying around, tracking Pablo and his cronies. Right. Great book, Killing Pablo. Highly recommend it. So there's a blueprint for this, right?
There is. But it starts, let me rephrase. It doesn't start with the commander-in-chief saying, this is what we're going to do, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, the thing about a clandestine war is the clue is in the title, right? It's got to be clandestine. So making statements like that it sells well for the run-up to getting elected. I mean, it's just the kind of thing we all want to hear, right? The fentanyl crisis is just out of control. But these drug wars have been going on for, my entire lifetime, your entire lifetime. And, you like to think, okay, this is the president that can actually make some headway. And maybe he can, but it will be a much more complicated endeavor than simply rolling it off the tongue.
And I don't see this leftist female president of Mexico, the new president of Mexico, wanting to aid in this at all. I could be wrong, but I don't see her being like, yeah, absolutely. You can embed with us or what have you, and you can do some off the book stuff. I don't know what that would even look like, but I tell you, the cartels, man, is as great as our JSOC is, the units within that. These are guys that have been at war, day on, stay on for almost, when did the drug war really ramp up? 2006, I think. So since then, hundreds of thousands of people have been killed. They have all the armament we have. They got 50 cals, they got technicals, they've got everything. They got helos, they got drones.
They got soldiers we train.
The hell yeah, they do. Los Zetas, right?
Yeah, and so would she resist? Sure, but she's a single politician. Can she be coerced or cajoled or, tempted into helping us out? I think so. I think that could be. But again, she's one person at the head of a democracy, a head of a government, and it's rife with corruption. I mean, read Killing Pablo, right? I mean, corruption in the ranks was a problem that they had. We're going to go hit X. All it takes is one soldier on there that's decided to take the gold, not the lead, and makes a phone call, sends a text message, semaphore, Aldous lamp, carrier pigeon, whatever he does, and the op's blown. I think it's a really, really hard thing to do, to go into another country and operate with a level of secrecy that you would need to operate on in order to be effective. And, the way you can tell, how do you tell you're effective? Well, I guess the price of drugs goes up in the United States because you're shrinking the demand. But again, to me, it's a lot like this, as you said earlier, quote, gun violence problem. I don't like that term either. It's a societal breakdown problem.
Right.
And so what's the problem down in Mexico? It's a societal breakdown problem.
What's a societal breakdown problem here?
It's a problem on our side, right? Because where's all the money coming from?
Right.
It's coming from us. The demand is here. Look, if the demand was for illicit Michael Jordan or Air Jordan shoes, they'd be producing those.
Yeah.
But they're not. The demand is for coke and for other drugs. And so that's what they produce, and they're making a ton of money. So going down there and shooting them in the face is all well and good. But, for every one you shoot in the face, there's 20 more right behind them. And if the money keeps flowing in, someone's going to pick it up. So you can't just attack the source. You've also got to attack the client base.
Yeah.
And that's not easy. It's just not easy to do.
No, my brother tells a story of being down in El Salvador working with their military in some capacity, and he's like, what is your biggest problem? And it was like, smuggling. And Jeff's thinking, drugs, whatever. And it was smuggling cheese or something like that, And seriously, and it's like we're losing so much revenue because it's illegally marked. That's produced in our country. In reality, it's an inferior cheese coming from down there. So But as long as there's a demand for that damn cheese and there's somebody that can get it cheaper by that way, then they're going to do it. So,
Sure.
you know, I think
I told you a few years ago about a guy in my office up in Vermont that had an adulterated maple sugar case, which we all gave him a hard time about. We all thought it was hysterically funny. But Vermont is the single largest producer of maple syrup, ergo maple sugar, in the world, regionally speaking. They produce more than Wisconsin, Michigan. So it's a huge cash crop, and therefore it's valuable. And so this guy was adulterating his maple sugar with cane sugar, which was much cheaper, and was undercutting everybody, was crushing the market. And it was a multi-million-dollar multinational fraud case on maple sugar. Who would think? But as you say, if people are going to pay for it, people are going to pay money, someone's going to fulfill that need.
Yeah. And I'm a maple syrup guy, and I can tell you, a little thing of maple syrup, costs $20-something, so it's, and imagine if you could just put a portion of maple syrup and the rest of it's just cane sugar. And you could do it for $5 and sell it for 20. Like you said, the money starts stacking up. One of our members owns a maple syrup farm up in Canada. I don't know if you know that or not.
I did not.
Yeah. Simon, he stayed here at the farm. Really good guy. He's from Quebec. And he sent us some of his maple syrup. It's actually fantastic. So,
yeah. And it's funny because in Vermont, because I was like, okay, how on earth is a state with, less than 600,000 people out producing everyone else? And I eventually figured, it took me a while, but I figured out everybody's tapping trees. I had a friend that had one big maple tree in his front yard. He had 3 taps in that sucker. He was making, maybe 20 gallons a year. So I always get a couple of quarts from him. But everybody's tapping trees up there. If there's a maple tree up there, it's got a tap in it. And, I haven't had to pay for maple syrup in a long time because I know folks can't get guns anymore, free ammo, but I can get all the maple syrup I want. Then it's crazy expensive. And that's what that guy was doing. He was undercutting the market, driving people out, and then he could buy up their market share.
Genius.
Okay.
Jay Fujimoto is on. He says, good morning from Hawaii. Good morning, Jay. Must be awfully early there. Johnny King reminds us that the movie Clear and Present Danger was about spec ops in Colombia. And that stuff was alive and well back then. I remember second recon battalion, one day all of their Spanish-speaking, Hispanic-looking guys just disappeared from Onslow Beach. It's like, where the hell did they go? Like, they're doing something down south. It's down south in North Carolina. I don't know where.
Probably not in Finland. Is probably a safe guess. Yeah.
And of course, Don says no blackjack Pershing being available at punitive expedition is probably not going to happen. It will be much more nuanced. Yeah, and I'm sure there'll be advisors or something down there. But as long as there's a buyers here, I don't see it going on anywhere. Johnny King, also Dr. Pullo, this is an interesting one here. It says, I heard on a podcast that the U.S. kept the poppy production going in order to keep steady drug flow to Russia and in order to keep them addicted to heroin. What do you think about that?
I don't know. I struggle to see the government involved in something like that. Not because they're not cynical enough to do it. It's just you worked for the government a long time. It really blows holes in your faith in conspiracy theories.
Yeah,
it's just human incompetence, right? If you had 20 people working on that project, someone's going to talk to somebody, and the word's going to leak out. So it sounds good, but frankly, they don't need to get their heroin from Mexico. I saw plenty of poppy fields burned in Afghanistan.
Well, that's what he's talking about. Johnny King says in Afghanistan.
Oh, in Afghanistan. I missed that part. Yeah. And at this point, we don't control the poppy fields in Afghanistan anymore. Mm-hmm. The Taliban does, because apparently we're okay with them being in charge. And, I remember going out on a few ops where we were talking to local leaders trying to convince, I was working sources. I was trying to develop sources in the area, but the civil affairs guys were talking to the local leaders saying, hey, stop growing poppies, start growing onions. Because, their soil's crap and it takes a really hardy plant to survive it. And, this guy with no education sitting there going, look, I make X for an acre of onions, and I make 200X for that same acre in poppy.
Yeah. Kiss my ass. I'm not.
How does this make sense? Honey, we're going to take a massive pay cut because, people in Toledo are dying of our product.
Yeah.
That's a tough sell.
Care less. Don't know where Toledo is. Don't care.
Right. I care about my kid eating, and my kid eats better if I make poppies.
Amen.
So I'm gonna make poppies.
Let's talk about another item on my agenda to discuss with you this morning. So I'm hearing a probably not on the JSOC running wild in Mexico.
Not in a huge, massive invasion kind of way. Yeah, I can see some targeted hits and some people getting rendition, if you will, their version of it, or like you said, advisors going in to help Mexican special forces, Mexican Marine Corps guys. They're pretty active and relatively trustworthy. I can see that happening. Sure, I can see an increase of money going towards that. I can see encouragement, but I just don't see the second Mardiv rolling down south into Chihuahua. That's going to be I think that'll be a non-starter. Plus, are you interested in having your kid die in
Hell no.
Mexico, over this, especially coming on the heels of 20 years of active combat overseas? Tough sell.
Yeah, it is a tough sell. There's a really great show on Amazon Prime. It only got one season, and I don't know why. I don't know if it was too expensive to produce because the production values are insane. It's called 000. And it is all about exactly what we're talking about. It does a great job of showing the people that use drugs, the people that produce the drugs, the people that ship the drugs, the people that are combating the drugs. And it's just, a phenomenal show, 000. If you're interested in that, highly encourage you to check it out. Let's talk about the killing of the CEO of United Healthcare in New York City. And I'll just start right out of the gate. When you look at this, does it have the hallmarks of a liquor store holdup amateur, or does this look like it has a little bit of pro fingerprints on it?
Well, the shooting video that I've seen one video. It looks relatively professional, and you and I and Will Wood discussed this quite a bit the other night. In that little snippet, what we see is a guy that's very calm about what he's doing. Right, when his weapon fails to cycle, he doesn't panic. He doesn't look at the gun like it broke. Right, he doesn't get that trout look where he stares at it and starts blah 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 blah. He goes right, doesn't bother to tap, just racks it and goes back to work. So that looked either very professional or very just inexperienced psychotic killer kind of guy. Because anybody that has a suppressed weapon and shoots subsonic ammo through it has had the experience where it fails to cycle the round, right? Or it fails to cycle the slide. The round just doesn't have enough energy to function the slide on a normal recoil spring. So you end up having to rack it. But if you know that's coming, you understand the malfunction's coming, you don't waste time tapping because it's not the magazine's failed to seat. You just rack because you know what's going on. And it speeds things along. That was very smooth, right? If you watch that, he's very smooth about it. He doesn't run.
I saw the finger coming off the trigger too. So that screams somebody who knows what the hell he's doing.
Right. But when you boil it all down, that screams somebody that's practiced that gun and knows what they're doing with that gun. So that certainly right off the bat makes him different than your average mugger, right? Because most of those guys just don't put the time in that any of your audience does. But now that we've got more of a timeline on the guy, he's starting to lose his professional edge, if you will, because they've got video. And kudos to NYPD, and to a lesser extent, in this case, the FBI. I mean, they've put in the shoe leather on this one. I mean, they've gone out and they found the hostel he was staying at. They pulled all the video of him, found a video where he took his mask off. It's about the only time they've got a picture of him without his mask on. Including,
there are probably hundreds of thousands of video cameras in New York, whether they're commercial or owned by personal folks, or I know that NYPD has put up tens of thousands of cameras around the city for this kind of scenario, I would imagine, right?
Sure. And philosophically, I have my issues with that, but as a former federal agent, it's very helpful. It's very helpful. I mean, I was involved in a case where we tracked a murderer in Vermont with the victim, had video of him with the victim walking around, and eventually figured out where he had killed the victim. And that because of videos, like you said, surveillance cameras on private businesses, Ring cameras weren't a thing then, but we're not in a government run surveillance state. We're in a privately funded surveillance state. And I look at my own neighborhood, right? I've got cameras all over my house, and out of the, let's say, 15 houses on my cul-de-sac, there's probably 12 that have cameras. So, police are going to be able to get a hold of that. And NYPD has done the work. I mean, they have backtracked this guy, probably doing exactly what you said in terms of availing themselves of all of those cameras. And they've backtracked him before the shooting and after the shooting. And they've gotten a real good idea. But that's what speaks to the lack of professionalism in this guy. He doesn't change his outfit. He doesn't comport himself like a guy who's trying to throw off the cameras, right?
I don't know, man, because he's even riding in taxi cabs with some sort of N95 COVID style mask on, and then again, I think what we're seeing is from the day of the shooting. Once he goes into Central Park, ditches the backpack, which is kind of absurd, but that it wasn't even more concealed than that. But I think that might have been to send a message as well. And I heard there was monopoly money in it or something. Who knows? But I mean, once he came out of there, he was gone. They think that he took a bus, and the use of public transportation is another thing that maybe is a more pro thing. And the fact that there were 2 men staying with him in the hostel also speaks to a team sent there to do something. You know what I mean?
Right. Well, and they've talked to those 2 people that were staying with him, and they both said he never took his mask off while he was in there. So that's interesting. And I'm sure they'll tear those guys' lives apart just to make sure.
Oh, yeah.
But the fact that, he kept his mask on, so clearly he's concerned about witnesses, but he never changed his clothes. A pro would have changed his clothes. A pro would have had
multiple times.
Right. He would have had spare clothing in that backpack. He would have swapped out. He wouldn't have been leaving messages around. Beyond a few, maybe to throw them off, like the words carved into the shells that were found at the crime scene. And
deny, defend, oppose. Does that tell you anything, or is that could be counter intel?
Sure. And if he's a pro, it's I'm trying to throw you off and make you look at this group of people that have a problem. If he's just a protester, like an ALF or an ELF guy from back in the day, then he's just making his statement. So his field craft is better than average, but to me it doesn't rise to the level of hired assassin.
Right.
Because a hired assassin, would have done a better job of that, and of throwing things off. Might not have even walked up to the guy with a handgun. Right. That might have been something he could have done at a different range. You recall the mafia hit that took place in the 90s, where the team of shooters all walked up wearing trench coats and Russian fur hats. You ever hear about that?
No.
It was the head of the Genovese family. It was the one that was the hit that launched John Gotti into the head seat of his family. So whichever family it was, I think it was the Genovese. But Sammy the Bull was kind of involved in that, but Big Paul gets out of his car to go to a steakhouse.
Paul Castellano. Okay.
Paul Castellano, yeah.
That hit. Yep.
And he and his driver pull up, and just half a dozen guys in like cream-colored ankle-length trench coats and furry Russian hats, right, that we've all seen with the folded-up ears and everything. And they just blast this guy on the street right in front of the steakhouse, and they all walk off. And, there's dozens of witnesses, well, not as many cameras, but all the witnesses said, well, what did he look like? I had a long trench coat and a Russian hat. Yeah, but was he black, white, green, purple? I don't know. A long trench coat and a fuzzy Russian hat and a big gun. This guy could have done things to disguise himself, mixed himself in with, large crowds in doing so. A pro would have done it a different way to throw off the cameras later on. This guy looks like to me at this point, as the investigation continues, more of an educated amateur. This is not Rich Brown deciding to whack somebody.
I don't know about that. Yeah, it's interesting. Now, as far as like who's behind it, I mean, it could be anybody, right? I mean, if the shell casings are purposely left there, they have it etched in or written in, whatever. So it looks like somebody who's pissed off, maybe, that's the way I would look at it. But this could be internal. This could be, right? It could be, I don't know. Motive. What do you think?
If you presuppose that the shooter was hired to do this, then sure, the money could come from anywhere. And this was done on a budget, right? It's not like he's staying at a nice hotel. He's staying in a hostel. He's taking bikes and taxis and subways. So that to me speaks to a poorly funded operation, which speaks to perhaps the lone shooter. But again, if you're a smart pro, I guess you would run it like a low rent operation. So we'll see, because I promise you they're going to track that bus to wherever it ended up. They're going to check every surveillance camera at every stop on that bus till they see him get off, and they're going to track him as much as they can until they can't anymore. And they haven't said whether or not they found prints on the rounds or DNA on the rounds, but I'm sure that's all been looked at. They're going to go back to the hostel. They're going to dust every surface in that hostel, and they're going to do comparison prints with every single person they can identify until they get a set of prints that at least possibly could be the shooter. So that when they develop a suspect, they can run those. And you've done these investigations. So they'll have, I would imagine they'll have him all sewn up before they actually have him arrested.
Yeah.
But I don't doubt that they're going to find him. Now, the other thing is, if he was hired to do this job, the first rule of assassination, kill the assassin.
Exactly.
So if you paid him to do this, the first rule for you is, whack him out so that you cut that chain from the shooting to you. So we'll see what happens there.
Yeah, it's interesting, man. And one thing I find interesting is how many people were killed in New York City that day. How many people are getting the full Monty with regard to NYPD, FBI? Everybody's involved in tracking this guy down. They're not. If it was just anybody else getting whacked on the city street, they wouldn't give a shit. Why this guy?
Yeah, well, because he's got money. I mean, if anybody at this point doesn't think we're living in a society with dual sets of rules, you're just not paying attention.
Amen.
I mean, you remember when JFK's kid crashed his plane?
Oh yeah,
and it killed him and his wife and
her sister.
Yeah, sister. So the plane goes down off the coast of Massachusetts?
Martha's Vineyard.
Okay. You remember what the response was to that?
Yeah, it was insane.
Yeah, they sent a destroyer out looking for him.
Oh, I didn't know that, but
yeah, the U.S. Navy destroyer out there looking for that guy.
Damn.
Now, not to speak ill of the dead, I'm not trying to, but let us suppose that Rich Brown, lifelong military member, combat veteran, father, arguably someone who has had a positive impact on not only his community, but society in general. Rich Brown crashes his plane with his wife and sister-in-law off the coast of Martha's Vineyard. Who's coming to look for Rich Brown?
Maybe one or two friends with a keg of beer and a boat.
At a rowboat, right? I mean,
exactly.
But what did that kid give to the society at large? Besides failing.
He started a magazine, I think, right before he got killed.
He failed the bar half a dozen times.
Yeah.
But he had a dad who was, in the Senate, or an uncle.
And he was pretty. Women thought he was very attractive.
He was a handsome man, which is, not a burden you and I have had to suffer under.
No, sir.
Yeah. So, a rich white guy got snuffed on the sidewalk. And look, shooting a guy in the rich part of town, okay, that's always going to rise to the level of increased police interest. But, make the argument that the exact same thing happens in Harlem at 6:45 in the morning, and the victim is a black guy and the shooter is a black guy. I hate to say the quiet part out loud, but is this response the same there?
Hell no.
I would argue it's not. The level of planning that appears to have taken place would probably raise the profile a little bit, but not to this level.
No. Not to this level.
And it's like this all over the country. I mean, when Zimmerman's trial was going on for Trayvon Martin down in Florida, it went on for 70, 80 days. And in that same time frame, you look at just Chicago, and there was something like 150 people killed, murdered. But it was black people killing black people. And so the media didn't care. The rent-a-mob folks didn't care. You didn't see Jesse Jackson or that mob out there protesting and throwing up. And I'm like, wait a minute, you've got an inner city genocide going on here.
Yeah.
But there's no money in it. Right? Who are you going to sue?
Nobody.
You're not going to make a public statement. You're not going to raise your own awareness. Where was Benjamin Crump for those people? Wasn't there.
Absent.
So once again, follow the money. Where's the money coming from?
No, well said on that one. Let's talk about Syria. Abu Mahab al-Jahani, the rebel leader, got a $10 million bounty on him. I guess my question is the U.S. going to work with him and lift the $10 million bounty? Is he still wanted? Are we going to take him out? What are your thoughts on that?
Realpolitik is a thing. I mean, there was a time when everybody in the world was trying to kill, what's his name? The former head of the PLO. Why can't I think of Arafat. Everybody wanted to kill Arafat at one point, right? There's all kinds of money to be had if you could smoke Arafat. Next thing you know, he's getting a Nobel Peace Prize.
I know.
Right? And I was present watching him one time cross the border with his 7 Land Rovers, and he had a runner that was out ahead of him in a BMW 7 Series, and the Israelis couldn't throw the border open fast enough to let him into Gaza. So things change. So is this guy, are they just going to arrange to have a meeting with him and shoot him and, pay the bounty? I doubt it. I doubt it. And, make the argument. Did the bounty drive him to the table?
I don't know.
Is the fact that the bounty's out there helpful if it drives him to the table? You tell me.
But I mean, he's been, from what I've been reading this morning, I read the bounty that they had on the .gov website, and just kind of given a synopsis as to why he merits that. And, this guy's been all in and out of Al-Qaeda and their proxies forever, direct hand killing innocent people. And he's just an all around scumbag that the world would be better off without. However, if he's going to work with us now, like you said, maybe he gets a damn Nobel Peace Prize. I mean, like you said, realpolitik is the thing. And I appreciate it, but it's also second, third effects as to, like, now you have Israel striking inside of Syria.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, I don't remember, were they doing that with Assad there? I don't remember, but they are definitely now hitting ISIS targets like it's their freaking job. And I suppose it is. What do you think, man? Much ado about nothing in Syria, or are we going to see an exodus out of Europe with all those Syrian refugees flooding back in?
Yeah, they're not going home. They've got cable TV and grocery stores that are full of
and air conditioning.
They're not going home, and they're getting paid, right? They landed in the right countries. They're getting paid. Do you honestly think you're going to see a drain out of Paris for this? They're on the verge of wildly changing the politics in a lot of these countries. Why would they leave? There's no disincentive to stay, and there's no incentive to go. So, they're not going anywhere. And let's face it, Syria is still Syria. It's still blown up. There's a lot of work to fix it, right? And you're not seeing the U.S. institute a Marshall Plan and a Berlin airlift to get Syria built back up like we did for Germany after World War II. Syria isn't the stalwart block against Russian expansionism that Germany was in World War II. So I don't think you're going to see the flood of money going in there. I don't think you're going to see the flood of people going back in there. I think it's going to remain a problem. Israel bombing Syria at this point, again, what's the disincentive? Right. It's not like Joe Biden's up in arms saying, look, stop that and we'll do this for you. He's just like, Mama, where's my ice cream? So will Trump fix that or change that or alter that? That remains to be seen. And I like to think that he'll do it with what's best for the U.S. at the forefront of his calculus. But again, it's realpolitik. So there's a lot of nuance there that I'm not aware of.
No. So. Well, speaking of the nuance and money, you mentioned money a moment ago. I read somewhere, and I don't know if this is true or not, that once Iran and Russia turned the money off to Assad, it was, start the countdown watch. He's going to be out of there. Have you heard anything about that?
I have not heard anything about it, but it makes perfect sense. I mean, It's not like Syria is the sole producer of lithium in the world, or, that they're exporting teak furniture that, Elon Musk is decorating his house with. I mean, what are the exports? What does Syria produce?
Terrorism.
Right. So that's a great export, but it doesn't raise a lot of money.
No.
So if you don't have money coming in, you're eventually going to run out of money. And then what do you do? So yeah, if his foreign supporters fall apart, then he's done. He's doomed.
But why escort him out of the country? I don't know why he didn't get the Gaddafi treatment. I mean, seriously.
Well, look, the lifeblood of the FBI is confidential informants, and I think that's true of most law enforcement agencies. Well, if you burn your CIs, then the next guy doesn't want to be a CI, right? So if you just say, well, Assad's been our boy for 30, 40, 50 years, whatever it's been, and we just smoked him at the end of it, well, the next Assad is going to be like, oh, no, I'm not going to align myself with those guys. I'm going to align myself with these other guys because they won't kill me. So it's right. Tough in terms of long-term investment if you develop a record for killing off your allies. Mm-hmm. It makes it a lot easier to put somebody in charge when they know that you're their golden parachute after the fact. Look, they keep their promises. I mean, the U.S. has a reputation for not wanting to stick around in wars for very long. Mm-hmm. Well, that has an impact on our opponents. Our opponents know, hey, look, just stick it out.
That's right.
It worked for the Vietnamese. It worked for the Afghanis. Mm-hmm. Just hunker down and endure. Now all you got to do is endure, because eventually the Americans will lose the will to fight. Mm-hmm. And we do.
That's right.
So that influences future behavior. Well, if every time you have a dictator in your pocket, at the end of their usefulness, you kill them or you allow them to be killed, then it's less easy to recruit future dictators. Sure, the same thing is true of Marines, right? Mm-hmm. If you recruit Marines and all they do is die and get thrown away at the end of their service and you don't give a shit about them, it's harder to recruit Marines.
Yes.
But if you recruit Marines and you say, look, you are part of something bigger. You will live forever. You will always be a Marine. You will be putting EGA stickers on your shit when you're 90, right? Then it becomes easier to say, look, I'm not just joining a Marine Corps. I'm joining the Marine Corps. And I am part of something the rest of my life. And makes it easier to recruit the next guy.
No, good points there. And talking about the Gaddafi treatment, I remember one of the more disgusting things that Hillary Clinton ever did or said, and that is a long list. But when she was cackling, we came, we saw, he died, and she's laughing her ass off about Gaddafi taking a K-bar up the rear end, and being murdered the way he was on camera. I don't know. I was shocked that the neocons weren't wanting to see Assad peeled apart on the street.
Yeah, and pull him out, try him, hang him.
Sure.
That's a little different than, like you say, the way Gaddafi went. But Gaddafi just didn't have any friends. That was his problem. He pissed off everybody over the course of decades. Mm-hmm. So nobody really felt bad.
Nobody shed a tear for that guy.
Yeah, nobody really did. Assad, he pissed off a lot of people too, but he was a staunch ally for people. And it's always funny to me how in the rush to hate Hillary Clinton that so many people have, they forget what a hawk she was.
Oh, yeah.
She was a really severe hawk for a Democrat, especially for a left-leaning Democrat. And she's done a pretty good job of hiding out from the people that would not like that. People don't realize how realpolitik that woman is.
But he used chemical weapons on his own people, man. And Russia has now, I heard he went to Iran, and now I've heard this morning that Russia's given him asylum. It's like, okay, well, how are you going to be a good standing member of the United Nations if you're allowing Bashar Assad to cozy up to you after he used chemical weapons on his own people? I don't know. We'll see how that plays out.
Yeah, and some countries care less about those things than others. Right?
Maybe he'll have an accident or a heart attack or something here in the next couple
People fall down elevator shafts in Russia all the time.
Or their planes fall out of the sky. It's the damnedest thing.
People tie themselves to chairs, shoot themselves in the head, and jump out of fourth-story windows twice, all the time.
All the time. I want to really shift gears, and this is getting to I know we're an hour into the show, but I really did want to, I want to talk tools of the trade. If you had to take up arms again, what would your loadout look like? But perhaps before we even talk gear and gadgets, what sort of mission profile would a man in his mid-50s even be engaged in to take up arms? I mean, let's be honest. I think there's a fantasy element to a lot of this crap that, now let's strip it down to bare bones. In reality, in the years coming, what, if any, kind of scenario would have you put in that position before we talk about this gadget or that gadget?
Your speaker broke up a little bit and all there, but if I understood you correctly, you're asking about, before we get into what gear or gadgets I would take if I had to redeploy into a combat zone of some sort, and you want to know what set of circumstances would force me to do such a thing. Does that sound about right?
Yeah. Well, yeah, exactly. Something like that.
Well, I mean, first of all, I just don't see a set of circumstances where me in my late 50s would go overseas. Right? I mean, one, I wouldn't want to, and two, the military wouldn't want me to. Right? Because anybody that's been there knows combat is a young man's game. And I may be proud of myself for being able to, plow out 3 or 4 10-minute miles at my age. But that would put me on the sick, lame, and lazy truck at the back of an infantry platoon these days, right? 10-minute mile, my God. I remember in Ranger School, the standard was a 5-mile run, 6-minute miles. And I did it. So there was a time, right? There was a time.
Mm-hmm.
And the sneaky thing those bastards pulled was there were parts of the run where you were running like a mile at 7 or 8 minutes. Mm-hmm. And that meant to make up time, because it was a formation run. You couldn't fall out of the formation then. So there was, times where you had to make up that lost time. You just haul an ass.
Yeah.
People dropping left, right. So one, the military wouldn't want me to go. So what would put me in that situation? I think an existential threat to the United States, like the Germans faced, for example, when the U.S. crossed the Rhine, or were getting ready to cross the line. They started putting their Volks battalions on the line. Mm-hmm. And that's when you're putting the seed corn of your future generations, right? You're putting your kids out, your 15, 16, 17-year-old kids in the line, and you're putting old men like us on the line. Mm-hmm. And old in infantry terms is different than old in societal terms, right?
Yeah, right.
I like to think of myself as, I'm not that old, but the reality is that for an infantryman, I would be ancient. Mm-hmm. So it would have to be something domestic. It would have to be a large-scale collapse for me to go into a sizable unit. I could see more likely than that would be a localized or even a generalized societal event, a collapse where you have rioting like you had in South Africa. Mm-hmm. You had some really good shows based on that, like we saw in the Summer of Love, where you just had communities being overrun by mobs. That would be a different set of circumstances, and that would play more to my strengths, right? Because the idea of rucking up, humping 25 miles and fighting it out with the Argentinians at Goose Green, if I walk 25 miles, I then need an IV and a week in bed, right?
All right, yeah.
With a 90-pound rucksack. But if I can do a fixed point defense or limited motion, limited movements, and I'm not in bad shape for a guy my age, right? I'm not, walking around with a cane or anything. I work out, I go for runs, I do what I do. But just, infantry combat is a very, very physically intense set of circumstances. So if we're talking about fixed point defenses, that impacts what you can use in terms of firepower. Right? So let us suppose that you're going to have to fight from a fixed point. Well, now do I really need a 223 or can I go to a 308? Right? Because now I'm not carrying it. I'm carrying it from one window to another. I'm carrying it down the street. Well, then a heavier weapon can, be more easily carried, and heavier ammunition can be more easily carried. So you go to a bigger gun. The real benefit of a 223 to me is it's controllable and it's lightweight, and you can carry a ton of ammunition. Our basic load was 210 rounds in the infantry back in the day. As a lieutenant, that's what I carried. I went to Afghanistan, I carried more than that. And you can, but the weight difference between 210 rounds of 308 and 210 rounds of 223 is significant. It's significant. But again, if you're just sitting in this fixed point defense, well, now maybe an FNFAL would be more of my choice. If I had to move, if I had to walk a lot, then the 223 would probably be about as big as I would go. I might even be tempted to use a 22 with a silencer on it, because shot placement is key. And, unless I'm fighting, main force VC, or NVA Army, I just don't foresee a set of circumstances where I'm really going to need heavy firepower, suppressive fire, select fire. And a 22, okay, just as dead as anything else. So lighter if I was moving, heavier if I was sitting still. Reliability is key. Right? You got to be.
Let's go back a little bit before we go, because I think you're leaning into like an M4 or AR-15 platform, which I agree with that. But I want to go back to the way I think of it I agree with everything you said. I look at like the Balkans as a scenario where 1 minute everything's kind of good, and the next minute it's just completely fucking unraveling. And like, what happened here? Um, so I imagine now as a CCW guy in his mid-50s, I would have, if things started getting unraveling, this is the way I look at it, Dr. Fuller, I've got some soft body armor. So I'm going to go out in town just like I do now, jeans and some kind of flannel on, and there's soft body armor under the clothing. So you can't see it. The gun is concealed. You can't see it. However, in my rig, in my truck, there's maybe a 5-gallon painter's bucket that has a battle belt and maybe a level 3 alpha, set of plates or something like that. But it can be concealed in a painter's bucket next to a tool bag. And then the tool bag has some bangs and smokes and stuff like that. So outwardly, there's nothing. And maybe even got a ladder because I might need to get into a second or third floor window to have an elevated shooting position. So I think there's a way that, and I know you know this as the gray man himself, I think there's a way that we can really costume our events. I don't imagine me running around with a squad or joining some sort of unit here in a domestic situation. I'm just going to use my firearms for me and mine like I would anyway, right? Am I off base in any of that?
I don't think so. I mean, I look at some of the social unrest that some of the South American countries have gone through in the last 15, 20 years. And I've read some of the blogs from the people down there. And repeatedly, the theme I see is concealability and maneuverability, right? So, and I recall reading, I can't remember where now, but reading that it's the guy with the simplest uniform usually wins. So there's a lot to be said for sneakers and a handgun and some concealable body armor, low vis backpack. I've gotten rid of all of my tactical backpacks. Anything with visible molly, I just don't use anymore.
Same.
Because I want low vis. I want to be the gray man. I want to be the guy that you see but you don't notice. And walking around with my level 3 FBI armor and a molly covered backpack with a big morale patch that says "Kill 'em all." God will know his own. And an FNFAO strapped across my chest. That to me screams somebody's going to walk up behind me with a 38 and screw it in my ear. So a low vis approach is definitely the way to go. And I'm a big fan of it. I dress purposely in a way that just doesn't make you think that I'm anything other than just some old tottering guy walking down the street, which is exactly perhaps that it attracts the wrong attention in the wrong neighborhoods. But by and large, you'll look at me and you won't think twice.
I did the same thing before we went to Naples, man. I went on Google Street View. I knew there were some places I wanted to go to. So I looked on the street view, like, what are people wearing in this neighborhood? And then I tailored the stuff that I packed to those places because I don't want to stand out because I'd read the blogs and, oh my God, Naples is the pickpocket capital of the world. And somebody asked the guy, like, well, what were you wearing? He's like, well, I had a Lakers hoodie on and a freaking flip-flops and shit like that. They don't dress like that. So of course you stand out.
Right. And like you, having been in Edinburgh in the last year, I got off the train in Edinburgh and it was flooded with Americans. And how did I know? Just the way they were dressed. I mean, and as soon as they opened their mouth, obviously you knew. But just the way they're dressed. And
the way they walk down the street is another one. And if you recall, like, so in the UK, obviously they drive on the wrong side of the road. They walk on the wrong side of the street. So you can always spot an American too, because he's kind of weaving in and out of people like, bro, get with the program here.
And shoes are a real easy spot, right? I mean, Nikes are popular, but they're not as popular over in Europe as, say, Adidas or something else, or just leather shoes. So I tried, like you, I tried very hard to fly under the radar. So again, if I'm moving around, then it's low vis, fast moving. If I'm fixed point, I want reliable. I mean, the single attribute of a handgun in my mind that is non-negotiable is reliability. It's got to go bang and not click. Accuracy, I can work with less accurate firearms. You take a guy with a skill set like Mike Seeklander, for example. You give him a Bursa with 4 MOA at 25 yard, and he'll still eat you alive.
That's right. Right,
he'll still eat you alive, and that's because he's training his skill set, and he's just a very accomplished shooter. So that is less true if his gun doesn't function. Right.
Well,
I've
that's
got Versa, and he's got the Wilson Combat, and his doesn't go, and mine does. Well, guess who?
yeah. And Mike is a great example of somebody who obviously he's in his mid-50s, but he's still strong as an ox. He's got a brown belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, so he can, and he trains tier 1 units a lot, probably more than the last couple of years, and he has probably the last 3 years doing a whole lot of that. So, they hire him because he can outshoot those units with a handgun or a rifle. He can out grapple. His combatives is better than they are. He's as strong or stronger than those. Now, he's had 2 hips replaced. Can you throw a load on him and expect him to give you a 25 miler? Probably not going to happen. Now, or he's certainly not going to be able to perform the next day. But I like Don Bothwell's point, and that is if it's a shit hit the fan situation, I think a firearm would be used to break contact. The last thing the old man wants is a sustained firefight. And what do you think about that? I think he's spot on.
Oh, that's my. I wouldn't limit it to just SHTF scenarios. That's my approach in general now. My lead self-defense item is my shoes, my sneakers, because I want to leave. So that gun is there to provide me options. But the chief amongst those options is getting me and mine off the X, right? Yep.
Yeah, 100%. So I want, just before we get into the gadgets, let's kind of rewind and encapsulate everything we said. We said that the most likely mission profile is some sort of domestic instability that leads us to having to heighten our protection level for our family, and they were also saying that we're going to really work on concealability. And what am I missing here, Dr. Fuller?
No, you're absolutely right. I mean, functionality, it's got to be, if you have to go to the gun, it's got to work.
Yeah. Can I go through our 5 things about a firearm? Reliability, number 1. Ergonomics, accuracy, and power. Now, power kind of serves 2 roles. It's also portability. It may be a really sexy John Wick, G34 that's long slide, but for deep concealment, probably not going to work. So, but power, power is another thing. It's a 10 mil sub compact might be really cool, but being able to control that thing is for follow up shots is a thing. So, yeah, reliability number 1, ergonomics, accuracy. You said you could work with that, power and portability. And to that end, what would be, if you had to have a rifle, say a truck gun or even something at home, what are you leaning toward? It sounded like you were leaning toward an M4 style.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not a fan of the truck gun. My car is not a holster, but I understand the concept. For me, the easiest choice, the ground ball choice, is Colt pattern carbine. So M4 style weapon. And that's not only because of its lightweight, its portability. It's largely the one club I can play the entire golf course with, if you will. I can shoot it from 3 yards to 300, no problem. And I struggle to think of a civilian application where I would need a 300-yard shot domestically. But should it arise, I can make that shot. But I've got a lot of years on that gun. I mean, I've been monkeying with that gun since I was a teenager.
Yep.
I've carried it in 2 wars. I've gone through basic training with it. I have got hundreds of thousands of rounds through that thing. I can tear it apart and put it back together blindfolded, no problem. I've done it. I used to do a competition in college way back when where we would take the parts of an old M16A1, tear it apart, throw it in a box in a Foot Locker, tear an M60 apart, throw all the parts in the box, shake the box up, close it, and you had to run like 25 yards, assemble both weapons, function check both weapons, and run back 25 yards for time. So you get pretty good at doing those. So my point is, I know the weapon system really well. I'm comfortable with it. I'm comfortable with the manual of arms, and there's just no other gun out there that I'm as comfortable with. So for a lot of reasons, that includes maintenance, right? I can maintain them. I have the parts for them. I know, I'm not going to say I'm a gunsmith, but I'm a skilled operator with the gun. Not an operator, but you understand what I'm saying.
Yeah.
So that's what makes me most comfortable with that platform for a variety of reasons. Now, if I was forced to use an M1 Garand to defend my home, well, I can do that. Can I field strip it and reassemble it as fast? Not even close.
No.
Not even close. So yeah, I'm leaning towards that style of weapon. Now the precise caliber, we can debate that. For me, it's going to be .223 because again, that's what I have on hand. The 300 Blackout is a great round, silenced, because you get rifle style ballistics all the way out to 50 meters, no problem, even with silence. But I just don't have the capital to turn around and spend on that platform and that ammunition system, or ammunition, and then start all over again. Because I'm not going to get 40 years behind the gun at this point in my life. So I'm going to stick with what I know at this point.
What about, I want to ask you about optic, but before I go there, Alan Kelly says a folding pistol caliber carbine in a non-tactical backpack, lighter, it conceals easily, definitely a concealed handgun on person, interchangeable mags. He's got something there, and while the ballistics is not going to be as good as a 5.56, I mean, for those close-in gunfighting ranges, i.e. 50 meters in, that we're more likely to find ourselves in, what do you think about a PCC in a Colt style?
Oh, it's a great idea. Great idea. And he's absolutely right. You put it in a non-tac backpack, no one's going to see it, no one's going to think of it, but when it comes out, it's at typical handgun ranges, it's far superior. You got more points of contact on the weapon. It's more controllable. You're going to get, instead of a 4-inch barrel or a 3.5-inch barrel or a 5-inch barrel, now you've got a 16-inch barrel.
Yeah, exactly.
So your terminal ballistics are going to go through the roof. The Cowboys used to carry 44 handguns and 44 rifles.
Yeah.
Interchangeability of your ammunition, it lessens your logistics tail. So being able to use the same magazines in my carbine and my handgun, big fan. I mean, for years I carried a Glock 22 for work, and I carried a Glock 27 on my ankle because push comes to shove, I could put the ammo and the magazines through the 27 if I had to.
Yeah.
Not a perfect solution, but a solution.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's what would work best for me in the short term. Yeah.
Optic, Dr. Fuller, where are you at?
Well, I would like to hear your thoughts on optic, and I'll be right back.
Okay. So let's talk about that. I have Aimpoint, was it the Aimpoint Pro Patrol, something like that, on most of my guns, with the exception of LVPO on the longer ones. And Alan says easier for a 70-year-old curmudgeon. I even on my PCC, and then I have a magnifier, Vortex 3x magnifier that I can also put on there. And I think I hear Dr. Fuller coming back to us now. Welcome back, Dr. Fuller.
Thank you. Pardon my running out there. So optics, I think, are critical. Assuming you haven't gone very far down that hole since
I was just saying that, just to catch you up, I have an LVPVO, low power variable optic, primary arms on my Wilson Combat AR. And then I've got a 7.5 inch with a 5.56 with a Aimpoint Patrol. And then of course I've got that same optic on my PCC, and then I can throw magnifiers on them if I need to, a 3x magnifier. But that's kind of all I'd said.
Okay. And I think it's important for your audience to know that you are not a huge firearms collector. I mean, you're a guy who, they are tools for a specific purpose, and you keep them for thus. And so you're not a guy that has 15 ARs to choose from.
I got 2, and one's short for a reason, and one's the handle with the long stuff. And I got a Wilson Combat Suppressor. Just got it last week.
Congratulations. Welcome aboard.
That I can take from the 16-inch gun down to the 7.5-inch gun and back and forth.
Wise. I have a 30 cal silencer because I can put it on 308s, and I can put it on 223s, and I lose a few decibels of noise reduction by putting it on the 223, but it's not the end of the world for me. But it's, again, one golf club that I can play the whole course with. So your question, are optics a good idea? Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, I had no optics in the first Gulf War, as I'm sure you did not either. No. And I had optics in Afghanistan, and it's a huge, huge game changer. Now, that being said, don't just slap it on your gun and go, okay, I'm good to go. Get some training. Right? Get the training. But what you'll find is that in terms of acquisition speed on targets, much faster. The ability to keep both eyes open and maneuver, much better. For you've chosen weapons for your use case. So you have weapons where you might have to take that 100-yard or 200, 300-yard shot, because there are those kind of ranges around your house. right? I mean, you can stand on your front porch and there's probably some directions you could shoot a kilometer.
Yeah.
That's not the case at my house. So my choices are different than yours. My choices are much more for CQB typical ranges. I mean, the longest shot I could make from my house is out off my front porch, and it's probably 200 yards down an easement out to a forest before my vision's blocked. But what set of circumstances would exist where I would take that shot? I just can't envision them. So my weapons are set up for close-in defense, right? Typically in my house. Because what's the most likely scenario would be a home invasion for me. I don't carry long guns in my car unless I'm going long distances. So for just local, I just don't, because the risk of having the car broken into is higher than, I think my potential need for a long gun. So for me, it would be a home defense issue. And the longest shot I envision for me in a home defense issue is from my bedroom down the hallway on my second deck. And that's 15 yards, 50 feet, 55 feet maybe. Because, and I've said it on the show before, my home defense plan is not to defend my first floor.
Right.
My first floor. And that unless you're a mob coming in with Molotov cocktails to burn me out, the first floor is yours. If you can get through all the layers of defense into my first floor and you want my big screen and you got the wherewithal to take it, rock on.
It's yours, pal.
It's all yours. But don't come up the stairs.
Yeah.
Don't come up the stairs, because that things will change and things will get noisy when you get up the stairs. And I'm very fortunate that my wife, as many of your longtime viewers know, is also a special agent. So we've been trained off the same playbook. There's a lot of advantages to that. Plus, she's a hell of a shot. I mean, she came really close to being the top gun for her class, which was kind of cool. Probably more exciting than it probably should be, but neither here nor there. But the fact of the matter is, I can operate with her on the same playbook, right? So the hand-arm signals, the verbal commands, okay, she went this way. I know exactly what she's doing because it's what I would do. Right. That helps a lot. It doesn't help when we're arguing over, you get the AR. No, I get the AR. Or you get the shotgun. I get the shotgun.
I think that I'm going to go back to I always kind of poo-pooed on the suppress thing. Like, well, why do I really need it? And then as we've done this show for the last 10 years, I'm thinking, man, do I want my family to be able to hear me communicate without ear pro? So the answer is yes, I do. And in a lot of situations, it's going to be a no-brainer on the suppress situation. What do you think about battle belts, chest rigs when it comes to things like this? Do you have one? Do you recommend them? What are your thoughts?
Before we get off of silencers, to me, another advantage is anybody that's using a silencer in the house is a good guy in my house. Right. So even if I lose track of my wife and I hear put, put, put coming from one room, I know she's shooting. All right. Right. So if I hear bang, 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 then I know it's not her shooting. Good point. And also, anybody who's ever touched off a long gun inside a house or inside a building, that's a significant emotional event. Right. So you better.
Or in a car, man. Whoa.
Yeah. Because I'm here to tell you through my tinnitus that it is a life-changing event. So
it's going to rattle your teeth in a car, brother.
Right. And I had a guy, I think I told you, fire off a bunch of ammo out of a saw one time in a car in Afghanistan, and without warning. And I'll tell you what, my ears still ring 20 years later. As to the battle belt, I think it's a great idea. It's, in your use case scenario, I think it's even more important because you are so far removed from speedy law enforcement response. And you did that fantastic article, and you've talked about it a couple times on the show, where you had somebody come to your home and you had to go deal with them, and you had a lot of the tools that you might have potentially needed with you because through the advent of just putting on a battle belt. And in your particular case, you're trained to carry one, right? I mean, you spent how many years in the bag wearing a police belt? I never did, right? My battle belts were always in the military, but I have one. I have one set up, and it's just easier because, if something does go wonky, I can go get it. I know all the gear is there. I put it on. And, oh, by the way, it slows me down, so I take more time, so I wake up more. So I'm just racing out the door, sleep in my eyes, trying to figure out what's going on. It's a much more deliberate process. I think it would also help, when law enforcement rolls up and sees a guy wearing all that, they're not going to think bad guy right away so much as I'll think, is this guy a cop? I mean, which may slow their response down, which may keep me alive just long enough to establish the fact that I am the good guy.
Yeah.
It's nice to have the tools with you, right? I mean, if all you have is a hammer, every problem's a nail. If the only thing you've got is a shotgun and you run out the door or you run down the hallway, but what you need is pepper spray, or what you need is a baton, or what you need is a crowbar, well, the shotgun's just going to have to do.
Yeah.
So it's nice to have those tools, or flashlight. I mean, good Lord, I can't tell you how many times we hit places when I was in the bureau and I was the only guy that has a flashlight, especially if it's daytime. Nobody brought flashlights. And they're too important a tool to have. And that's when you're with a crew of guys, let alone if you're all by yourself. So
a couple of Alan Kelly says, yes on the suppressor. Amen on the tennis. Practice regularly using one. Don Bothwell says, Dr. Fuller has a very unique situation with a spouse that is trained and competent as a wing woman. Not everyone has that option, and it's something that many of us don't address. Who's your immediate backup? Who's watching the back door while you're holding off the assault on the front door? There ought to be at least some training of our significant others to cover that space. Yeah, and my brother and his wife, they've been training a lot, and his wife has really come along. I think next time you train with Sarah, not that you have, but I think you'll be really impressed with what she can bring to the table now.
Well, and it does change things dramatically. Like in that incident that I just mentioned where you had somebody at your house. I mean, Miss Lisa is a lot of things, but a combat Marine, she is not.
Nope.
Thank God. But, so, in a very real way, she becomes something that you're protecting, and it's not protecting herself. Not to say that she wouldn't rise to the situation if push came to shove, but she would lack I think, a significant set of tools that perhaps a more trained individual would have, and that going in. So okay, I'm on my own on this one, and I've got to make sure that the bad guys, whatever I have to do, stay away from the people that are most important to me in this world. So I fully recognize that I'm in a great spot with that, and.
Yeah, it's a great point. It's like it's understanding the mission. And in that instance with the guy outside, there were 4 women in my house: my mother and my daughter, one of my daughter's friends, and Lisa. And I've got the lights off inside the house, so they're able to see what's going on with me and this guy. And my mother, who had dementia, at the time, she's wanting to go outside. So Lisa's trying to corral the women, like, hey, we're not going to make this problem worse for him. He's dealing with it. He's got it. And like you said, you can go anywhere on the property, take the damn F-150, but you're not going through that door, brother. I'll tell you that right now. That is not happening.
Yeah, and it limits you, right? So you can't just go, oh, I can't. There's 10 of these guys. I got to go. I'm beating feet. You can't do it. Right? You're stuck. You are pinned to that location. And honestly, just having the conversations. Like my ex-wife, she didn't want to talk about stuff like that. And I was an active agent at the time. So my response requirement was significantly higher than it is now. So talking to her about, hey, look, if X happens, this is what I need you to do. That was a non-starter. She just was not interested in that conversation at all. So that meant that if something did break bad in my presence and she was there, she was an unknown. Right? Yeah. I didn't know what she was going to do. Because she would refuse to discuss it, refuse to learn, refuse to take advice, refuse to take guidance. Whereas my wife now, the conversation is, okay, if things go sideways, who's going at it and who's running away?
Yeah.
If the kids are here, who's got the kids? Now, of course, the societal default is wife goes with kids, man goes to bad guy. But in our case, in our society, wife's got the protection of being an active FBI agent. I do not.
Right.
Wife is younger. I am not. So our default position now is I defend the kids. She goes after the bad guy.
Interesting.
Now, that's not to say that those roles can't change if I'm 20 yards away and she's right there with the kids. But that's our start point, our common point of deviation. And both of us have the idea of, look, if one of us has to engage, it's only, well, in her case, it might be to make the arrest or whatever. In my case, if I'm the one engaging, it's only to give them time to get out before I'm getting out. But to your bigger point, you have to understand your particular use case. You have to understand your particular situation and make your tactics fit your situation. If you are 400 pounds with a bad knee and cardiac problems, then your response to such a situation is going to be per force different than a 22-year-old MARSOC Marine.
Mm-hmm.
It has to be. And that doesn't make you a bad person. It just makes you cognizant of your limitations and what you're dealing with. In your case, you're very tactically sound, you're well trained, you're well armed, you're well equipped, but your situation demands you defend in place.
Mm-hmm.
Because you had 4 people that were valuable to you that you had to stay there and protect, period. End of conversation. So it doesn't, there's no judgment on that. It's just you have to recognize that that's the situation. And every single person watching this has to make that decision. Like Alan Kelly is not the 30-year-old super trooper that he used to be, right? Mm-hmm. It doesn't make him a bad person. He's fortunate. He's lived as long as he has, but now he has to plan accordingly within his own limitations and strengths. Mm-hmm. And I would suggest that is the truth for anyone listening to this cast.
And to that end, proportionality now shifts. Like the 22-year-old MARSOC guy, maybe he can't go to the gun quickly, but as a 70-year-old former trooper with bad knees or whatever Alan has, he can go to the gun. I mean, he's still a very capable man, and I mean, that gun is a great equalizer.
Sure.
Brian says, I live in a country and I never set up a battle belt for home defense. Your point that it simplifies your fast response makes a lot of sense. I think I'll do that. Yeah. Call it a duty belt, call it whatever you want. I mean, carpenter, it's your tools. You put your tool belt on to do your thing, and that's it. It hangs behind the doors, ready to go. And for me and Lisa, it's very simple. We've had this conversation. Just get behind me. I mean, if something starts getting weird, and get behind me and get on the phone. That's your job. Where I go, you go, and you just stay behind me. I'm a meat shield for you, and we're going to get the hell out of there. I'm not making arrests anymore. I'm not detaining people. The gun is for us to beat feet, and that's about as simple as it can be.
Period. The battle belt idea, and I'm just using that as the short-term phraseology. Mm-hmm. To me, it's just like my gun bag for going to the range. Right? I pack my gun bag for going to the range, and I forget it. It's packed and it's forgotten. But I know that if I'm going to the range, I have to take the gun, I have to take a can of ammo for whatever gun I'm going to shoot or guns I'm going to shoot, and that bag. Mm-hmm. And I know that in that bag are my ears, my eyes, my whatever I might need out on the range, some limited tools. If I'm taking one of my Glock 9s, I'll take, I know that there's ammo in there. I know that there are magazines in there. So it simplifies my thought process. Mm-hmm. And that's in a very low stress environment.
Yeah.
Right? So to Brian's point, if something ugly is happening, speed is important and simplified decision-making is important. I know, okay, I have to get my gun. I have to get that battle belt. And maybe if you live alone or you live in such a set of circumstances where there can be a gun already on the battle belt, you just go pick it up, strap it on, off you go.
Yep. And my battle belt has, it's a safari retention holster. So if I am grappling, there's no chance of the gun coming out. And of course, God forbid that would happen, but just in the off chance that it does. So these are things to think about. The time to prepare is now, because when the time to perform comes, that opportunity for preparedness is completely gone. So why not be now? And to your point, I talked to Manhar a lot, who runs a Cobra security company in South Africa. And prior to the riots in Durban in his city, his use case scenario for his AR was just like yours and mine. It comes to my house, they can have the first floor, wife and kids on the second. I'm going to put you in the dirt if you step foot on the stairs. And then it was like, oh shit, I have to defend. I have to shoot at ranges I never would have thought I would have to, after these mobs of thousands and thousands of people failed to heed the warning of the baton rounds that they were firing at them. And then you selectively target the ones in the mob that have long guns and put them in the dirt, and suddenly the mob breaks up. And there's no police response. Police are busy looting just like everybody else. So although the use case might be one, we think it's one thing, society broke down for him, and then it reestablished within 30 days, and life was back to normal again, and they're cleaning up the mess. But there's nobody coming around. The shell casings are gone. The bodies are gone. I mean, nobody's coming to investigate what happened. And we've had some interesting conversations offline. I'll say it that, but you just never know. And that's why we're having this conversation, right?
Right. Exactly. And you like to think that wouldn't happen here. We always that's not going to happen here, not going to happen here. But that's the same mindset that gets, paratroopers to jump out of planes over Normandy, or Marines to run up a beach at Peleliu. right? Oh, it's going to happen to somebody. It's just not going to happen to me. Well, okay. But hope for the best, prepare for the worst, right?
Mm-hmm.
You like to think it's not going to happen to you. That's awesome. But the folks who are, especially the American Warrior Show members, or American Warrior Society members, understand that you can hope for the best, but you must prepare for the worst. It's a responsibility that you just can't avoid.
Yeah.
You have to address it, and address it within your own reality.
Right.
I mean, your reality out on Potato Farm Road is different than my reality in a suburb of Charlotte.
Mm-hmm.
But you got to plan for not Rich's reality, not my reality, but your reality.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think that's a great place to end it, Dr. Fuller. Thank you so much for being on today. If you want to check out T.C. Fuller's amazing books, No Safe Alternative, Empathy for the Devil, etc., please click the links in today's show notes. You'll see a link to Dr. Fuller's website where you can purchase those books. I'm sure you can get them anywhere that books are sold. But if you'd like one signed by Dr. Fuller, they make a great Christmas present, by the way, as does some of the American War Study swag or my book on violence and varietals, Confessions of a Savage Sommelier. You can pick up all that wherever books are sold as well. Dr. Fuller, thanks for being on today, sir.
Rich, thank you so very much. And I always enjoy coming on here. I enjoy talking to you. I enjoy our conversations, even when they're not on camera, because at the end of the day, the fight is coming. Be ready.